dropping LGBTQ data collection from the census. Smaller things that might fall under the radar but can have enormous consequences. We've also
Okay, this is about
LGBT
issues in the 21st century.
Some moments of restraint and something, possibly approaching hope. Like when everyone expected that the Trump administration was going to issue a very broad executive order expanding the federal government, government employees, government contractors, ability to invoke religious beliefs in order to discriminate against LGBTQ people. That did not come when a religious liberty order was issued. Who knows what will happen or what's in the works now, but it didn't come. And we also recently saw that some semblance of hope when 24 House Republicans recently rejected an amendment to stop funding transition-related care for military service members and their dependents. So nonetheless, I would say that the anti-LGBTQ movement's main goal since losing the marriage battle, mainly to exploit transphobia and to push for very broad religious exemptions to non-discrimination law, those goals are alive and they're well and they're being carried out by the White House, in many state legislatures, and in our federal agencies as well. And there's lots of other issues that our community faces, and I just want to kind of name them as we start, and then we'll talk about the panelists. We see a continued, really disproportionately high level of violence and hate crimes, particularly against trans women of color. We have disproportionately high profiling and criminal justice enforcement against LGBTQ and gender non-conforming people. We have the massive changes that are happening in immigration enforcement and detention and asylum and refugee practices are having an impact on our community. And the threat of healthcare, obviously, some things have developed in healthcare this week, but all that stuff and funding impacts LGBTQ people and HIV positive people in a particular way. So these are some of the things I expect we'll talk about today, and I'm just going to go ahead and introduce some of the panelists in the order that they are seated, which is roughly, strangely, almost alphabetical. So yay. So next to me, hello, we have you're next to me and you're Renee. We have the lovely Clay Aiken, who, as you write up your stuff.
No kidding. I wonder if he'll sing us a song.
As you likely already know, Clay is a very successful and extremely talented singer, but he is also, I think it's true, so I named it. He's also an actor, an author. He started a charitable foundation called the National Inclusion Project for Children with Disabilities, and he ran for Congress in 2014. That is good. Next, we have Guy Benson. Hello, Guy. Guy is the political editor of townhall.com, a Fox News contributor, and co-author of a book called End of Discussion, which was published by Random House, and a new edition is coming out on Tuesday. And he's also made many a top 30 under 30 list. Maybe not this year.
Not anymore! At 32, it's over. It's all over.
Done. All right. Okay, then we have Alex Mohajer, who is a political writer and commentator for HuffPost, among other places, and also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Bros for America, which started as Bros for Hillary. And that too. All right, we get to read up the room, apparently. All right. I would be extremely remiss if I failed also to mention that Alex was named as Out Magazine's 100 Most Eligible Bachelors in 2017, and I hear he's interested in dates. So just at the outset of the panel.
I got 0 dates off of it.
I mean, that's unbelievable, people. You have to rectify that. Okay, so moving on. Okay, we have also Matthew Craffey with us, and he is. Matthew is the chairman of the Log Cabin Republicans of California, and he is also the president of Log Cabin Republicans of Los Angeles. He's also a musician, a car enthusiast, and he ran for state assembly in 2016. So.
I'm looking for dates too. So.
Awesome.
I think there's a solution sitting right next to me.
That will make for an interesting dynamic of the panel later. So. All right. Finally, last but certainly not least, is Tara Slavin, who's the Deputy Director of Policy and Community building a department at the LA LGBT Center. A wonderful colleague of mine who I work with a lot and appreciate. For folks who don't know, the LA LGBT Center is actually the largest LGBT organization in the world. And Tara is a lawyer and has a tremendous history of amazing things, but specifically serving LGBT survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And you don't have to declare your desire for dates or not at the end of this.
I think my wife might have a problem.
Excellent. So that's who's with us today, and we're so grateful to have everyone. So I'm going to kick it off with an open question that I'm just going to have everyone. I'm going to go down the line and have folks answer. An open one. What do you think the political climate looks like now, from your perspective, in terms of moving LGBTQ equality forward and not backwards? What are your biggest concerns in your mind, if you have concerns? What do you see as possible, opportunities? Are there possible opportunities? What do you think we should be paying attention to? Clay, I turn to you. Yeah, hey. I'm sure this happened.
Never did very well. I'm set. We've got an even number of people looking for dates. I don't want to mess it up. Thank you. This is my third year doing this panel here at Politicon, and it's probably the first year where I find myself almost conflicted in how I feel. I think I share a lot of the same concerns that you mentioned earlier, and that I think imagine a lot of people in this room may share. I know Donald Trump because I worked with him at one point, or I know the person who I worked with. I don't know if I know this guy, but because it's different. But I think that there should be. I'm so afraid I'm going to sound like I'm defending him, but I'm not. But I think that there should be some recognition of the fact that the Republican National Convention this past year did mention LGBT issues. Very little, but some. And so I think there was some progress. That said, he got into office and started, not living up to that idea. I just did a panel earlier that was specifically Trump, genius, or lunatic, and I said that I think he's just a narcissist, and I think most of the stuff that he has said and done has been for attention. That said, the courts are the issue that I'm probably most afraid of. I think that obviously Gorsuch being appointed to the Supreme Court may not have changed the makeup of the Supreme Court right then, but it certainly was very different than what it would have been had Hillary Clinton won, and it took away an opportunity for us to try to have a Supreme Court that was equality-minded. I'll say the same thing that I did in my last panel, and then I'll let me quiet that guy go. As much as I am bothered by Donald Trump and his lack of clarity, I think that's probably the thing that scares me the most, is because he doesn't have, you just really don't know. He says one thing, he does another. He tweeted about the transgender military ban, but that's not policy, and I kind of think he'll never be policy because he just was trying to distract the news for a while. I just don't know what he's doing, but I do know what Mike Pence would do, and so there's a little piece of me that would rather Donald Trump stay president and get jack shit done for 4 years, as he's so successfully done for 6 months, than have Mike Pence become president and get a lot done in 4 years. How do you feel about that, guy?
Well, so as you heard in the introduction, I wrote a book 2 years ago with my co-author Mary Catherine Ham. Did you see it?
Thank you. Say as a valid one.
Thank you. You should definitely buy it.
I'll let you borrow
a new edition. Typical. A new edition is coming out this week, and we've spent the last 2 years really crisscrossing the country selling the book mostly to conservative audiences. And I came out in the book publicly. My family knew, my friends knew, but it was not a public thing. And we wrote so much about gay rights in one of the chapters, I felt like I had to disclose it. And so, in a footnote, I came out as gay. I did an interview with Megyn Kelly, who's a rock star. And this comes up in our talk
says something, doesn't it?
every time we speak to conservative audiences, because we're addressing gay marriage, and she and I both happen to be conservatives who are for gay marriage, and I quickly mentioned I happen to be gay myself, and you get some surprise from the crowd. I just wanted to give you guys a sense of the reaction that I've gotten throughout these travels, and then there's some data to back it up as well. Two anecdotes. One was we were in Denver, Colorado at a very conservative event, pretty Christian conservative event. And we were doing a book signing, we had a great big line, and we're taking pictures and signing books. And this lovely little woman came up to me, and she sort of in hushed tones, wasn't exactly sure how she wanted to say it or the correct words. And she said, I just want to tell you that the way that you've done everything, and I have a nephew, and he's the way you are. we just love you, and none of that matters to us. And that was a really heartening experience for me. And she was channeling a lot of a sentiment that I think anticipated. The other example was from Albuquerque, New Mexico. This was just a few months ago. Very conservative crowd, older crowd. And someone during the Q&A asked Mary Catherine, there was the Day Without Women, remember the Day Without Women, that whole thing? What did you do, Mary Catherine, on your Day Without Women? And she gave this whole answer. And then I think the person in the audience felt bad that I'd been left out of the question. She said, well, Guy, what did you do on your Day Without Women? I'm like, that's every day for me, if you know what I mean. And I wasn't sure, should I make that joke with this audience? Is that gonna, and it went over really well. And it's sort of like the air went out of the room in terms of any tension, and it got a laugh, and everyone was chill with it. So anecdotes aren't data, but there's also data. Pew Research came out with a new national survey just a few weeks ago that showed that among Republicans in America, support for gay marriage is now exactly even. There has been a 52-point swing in favor of gay marriage among Republicans in the last 10 years. And that is driven, you can clap for that. And that's driven in particular by younger Republicans and younger conservatives. Among millennial conservatives, it's about 60 to 65%.
The Generation Z is
gay
waking
marriage.
up.
So I really do believe in a number of ways. LGBT issues, especially same-sex marriage, it's just generational. At some point, it's going to be a complete non-issue for Republicans and Democrats alike. We're just not quite there yet. So I'll leave it at that for now and look forward to the conversation.
So what I'm troubled by, I'm just hearing you talk, brief flowing ears, what would have happened had we had Gorsuch on the Supreme Court when the matter came up before the Supreme Court a few years back with the referendum? I mean, I think we're in a very peculiar time because
You're right.
the popular vote winner who was counts supposed to win didn't. And so we've got this, we're in this position where we're taking steps backward. And how do we solve that problem? And when the popular sort of tide of public opinion is moving one way, and yet you see these regressive stances by the man who's sitting in the White House in the executive branch. And I think the answer to that is really coalition building. We have Republicans and Democrats, liberal and conservative, on this panel, and I think it's sort of a time now where we have to look to each other to stick together and sort of build coalitions with one another to protect our rights and our interests. Because everything right now in the media is liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat. I hate that. It is so dumb. If you guys are watching the news and you see everything framed as a Republican versus Democrat issue, you have to start asking them why. Why is everything being boxed into this dichotomy of false choice? We can have common ground. We can build coalitions. Can, seek to unite on certain issues, and that's something that we are not seeing, and I think the answer to that is to start talking to each other once again. We're not talking to each other anymore, we're just shouting at each other. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with the not talking to each other part as well. I mean, I agree with a lot of what was said, but particularly that part. I came out in 1999, and I remember what America was like in 1999 on LGBTQ issues, and I struggled. Part of the reason I struggled so long, I mean, I think I knew since I was 7 or 8, but I struggled so long because I probably knew I was a Republican before I knew I was gay, but I was told you couldn't be both. you know, and so that that kept me in the closet for a lot longer than I probably needed to be. And you know, when I came out, you know, it was a mixed bag. I mean, there were people in the party. I became active in local politics as soon as I came out, and there were Republicans who were supportive, there were Republicans who weren't. The difference I've seen happen since 1999 within my own party tells me that this is just, it constantly is going in the right direction. I think that there has definitely been some setbacks this week that a lot of people have been, you know, it's obviously been in the news, and it can feel like, oh, we're going backwards and there's no stopping it. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think this movement has always had 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, and we've learned from the steps back. We learned in California when Prop 8 happened, we learned that we didn't really fight against that message properly, and we came back stronger. And something that we also learned throughout all these debates is that it does take talking to each other. It's going to take Republicans and Democrats to finish the journey of equality. This isn't going to happen by just, you know, going to our corners and saying, you know, my side's right and your side's wrong, and I'm going to call you names. It has happened. It's changed so much because we as human beings have approached other human beings on a human level and said, I am this person. We have a lot of other things that we probably agree on other than maybe this one issue. Let's start there and talk. And maybe we'll find that there's a lot of common ground. And it's through that discussion that just in a very short period of time, the country's gone from being, you know, against something like marriage equality to being supportive of it in both parties. And, you know, and I think that there's a little bit of a catch-up that needs to happen on trans rights. You know, I think there's been more time, there's been more discussion for a longer period of time on being gay or lesbian. It's going to take
Republican
some time
Party,
to get
the RNC, does
trans
not
rights, but it's
accept
going
the
in
gay
one
marriage
direction. We just have to
decision.
keep fighting against
It's
it.
very distinction.
So I think being at the very end of a panel, making a list is always interesting. But people on this panel seem very optimistic. And I feel like I have some optimism, but I also want to really raise some of the concerns. And particularly the concern I see right now is an onslaught opposing the trans community and trans rights. And as we address that, so, you know, there is the military tweet that Donald Trump did, you know, which isn't even policy, but sort of creating that narrative and dehumanization. And then there's all the other little things that are happening, whether it's the Department of Education and the Department of Justice rescinding trans guidance in schools, the Health and Human Services Department rescinding non-discrimination and, you know, giving notice of their intent to rescind non-discrimination in healthcare on trans issues. HUD, right? HUD, our department that is most responsible for homeless youth. And right now, about 40% of LGBTQ homeless youth in this city are LGBTQ. And that's vastly disproportionate. And HUD is literally removing, you know, its tools to implement non-discrimination. So I feel concerned. And I think we're really just at the start. And so, and I feel like it's that slow chipping away. I think some things get a lot of attention, but because so much of our success under the Obama administration was regulatory and was part of these administrative systems, that these slow chipping aways, which are harder to address and harder to get momentum around to sort of fight back, I'm afraid that's going to have real long-term consequences.
Before I pose my question, does anyone want to respond to what Tara just said or what anyone else has said? Otherwise, I will ask you a question. It looked like Alex wanted to say something. That's why
I was just going to use profanities. I mean, yeah, I was just going to say that Donald Trump, I mean, the man has not stepped foot near the military, and he was a 5-time draft jumper. He has some nerve telling us who can and can't serve in the military. I'm just leaving.
See, I can tell Alex wanted to say something. All right.
Notice how the Republicans don't say anything.
I have a foundational question that's setting up for another one that I'm going to pose to the Republicans on the panel in a minute. But I would like to hear from, not everybody has to answer this, but, you know, I think a lot of this is a question about, you know, what do we really take full lived equality, looks like? LGBTQ equality, what does that look like? And is it something, beyond full recognition of our identities and our relationships? And I ask this in part because I think it's, some people have narrower versions, some people have broader, visions of what that is. I think it's also at the crux of where some people, frankly, as you alluded to, Matthew, think you can be gay and a Republican at the same time. So I just want to, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, but like, what's your vision of sort of like what full LGBTQ equality looks like? Like, when will we know we got there? I don't think
that's a great question.
One thinks that like marriage was necessarily that moment, but where do you think it goes, and how broad does it go? And then we can talk about what that sort of means for like implications for policy in other areas.
Republicans?
No, that's for everybody. No, that's for everybody.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah,
I guess I don't know that there ever comes a time where you just. I was thinking about this with any journey of any group. We look at the civil rights struggle in this country. There's never really come a point where we just said, "Oh, we're done," or we've got full equality. I don't know that you ever totally get there, as long as there is an incident or there is something that happens that marginalizes someone in our group. What I will say is, I think what we should aspire to is towards that, and what that would look like is a day when we don't have employment discrimination, when we don't have people feeling like they're targeted because of who they love. That's the biggest thing for me, and I think we'll know it to some extent that it's happened when groups like the group that I'm part of, Lockout Republicans, or Stonewall Democrats, and groups like that no longer need to exist because there's not really any relevancy to it anymore. There isn't really just a whole lot of people who feel like they need to be part of something that's separate from everyone else, because the equality is at such a point that they feel just part of society, not necessarily part of a specific group. And I see that happening more like in the millennial generation, where they don't tend to necessarily hang out only at gay bars. People who are millennials and gay that I've met, it's like they don't feel the need to go to gay bars the way when I grew up. It was like that's the only place you felt you could go to be yourself, where you could be safe. And because they grew up in a time, to some extent, where they didn't have to deal with some of that, especially those that live maybe in more urban centers, then I think that you start to kind of have, as the generations go on, a feeling of that we're more, just individuals and made up of who we are, instead of putting us into certain buckets. And that maybe is what at least close to full equality could look like.
Thanks for that. Tara?
So I don't think we're going to have full equality in the LGBT community until we address intersecting oppression. So LGBT people are not just LGBTQ. They're Black, they're undocumented, they're women, they're seniors on food stamps. And so if we are gonna, right now, nearly 40% of all incarcerated women across this country are lesbian and bisexual. The likelihood of acquiring HIV for an African American male who is gay or bisexual is 1 in 2 over the course of their lifetime.
Oh, did you hear that?
In just a few months ago, an undocumented Latina trans woman was arrested and detained by ICE in the very courthouse where she was obtaining a domestic violence restraining order. And so the only way we're going to get that full equality is if we're addressing all these intersecting issues.
There's so
and I think
much,
it goes back to the point you were making
so much
earlier,
confusion.
because we have to work in coalition.
Anybody else want to say anything in response to that?
Why are you winking at me?
I'm a winker. It was actually totally involuntary.
I think when we stop having to ask the question, how we get there, and it's sort of shocking to me that we are still asking that question about how we get there. Hillary Clinton, that big speech when she was at the State Department in 2011 on gay rights or human rights or gay rights, and she talked about transgender individuals during that speech. And I think one of the main points she made, and I think it's good, is that these are our friends and our neighbors, and because there are human rights, our governments are bound to protect them. And right now our government isn't protecting those rights. And the way we get there, that's we've said over and over again, is we have to look to each other to pull each other up.
Thanks. Okay, so now this question is to Matthew and Guy. I'd love to hear your perspective. Guy, you talked about how obviously you feel like there is some positive movement, happening. You sort of implicitly alluded to that, within the party. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, like what role you think gay Republicans do serve, and I guess to understand more how you square sort of like the progress that you're seeing both anecdotally and in the data with sort of things like the sheer number of anti-LGBTQ political appointees and the positions that still feel pretty starkly anti, frankly. I'd just like to hear your perspective on that, either piece of it.
So I think for me, just living my life normally every day is just kind of a small contribution to just our like Fox News viewers, town hall readers, people, groups that I speak to, just showing up and just nonchalantly being like, P.S. I'm gay. I agree with you on taxes. I agree with you on X, Y, and Z issues. We agree on this stuff. We're not necessarily going to agree over here. And I don't automatically believe that because you don't agree with me on this policy issue, it means that you hate me. Right? I think that using that word and indicting an entire large group of people as hateful, I think turns a lot of people off and says like, whoa, that's really unfair. I'm mad now. That does not mean that homophobia does not exist, as I see every day in my Twitter mentions. So it's a balancing act. And so the question sometimes you get sort of angry, liberals, sometimes gay activists being like, how can you possibly be conservative? I'm not super high on the Republican Party at the moment for all sorts of reasons, but I'm a conservative. How can you possibly do that? So, well, because on most issues that I think about, I'm conservative. And that's sort of the way that I prioritize my worldview. But I also sort of follow up with the question, would you prefer that we not exist within the party? Would you prefer that there are not people who are trying to make a positive impact and change perspectives and perhaps bust old stereotypes within the conservative wing of the Republican Party? I think it's really important for us to be there. And I have to say, I was at the Republican convention this year covering it, and it was super weird in a lot of ways. But watching Peter Thiel on stage